The ceramic bowl slipped from Angelina's hands, shattering against the Italian marble floor as she stood frozen in the doorway of what was supposed to be an empty bedroom, watching her paralyzed husband thrust into the woman who cleaned their sheets. For 4 seconds, she counted them, would always remember counting them. Angelina Garner could not move, could not breathe, could not process what her eyes were seeing. Clint, her husband of 6 years, who hadn't walked a single step in 4 years, who couldn't lift a spoon to his mouth without her help, who needed her to shift his dead weight every 2 hours to prevent bed sores, was standing. Not just standing, moving with the fluid grace of a man who had never known a wheelchair, his strong arms wrapped around Julia Foster, the 24-year-old maid Angelina had hired out of pity just 3 months ago. The sound of shattering ceramic finally penetrated their passion. Clint turned, and for one moment, Angelina saw pure panic flash across his face before it transformed into something else: calculation. Even now, caught in the ultimate betrayal, his mind was working, strategizing, planning his next move. "Angelina," he said, and his voice held none of the slurred weakness she'd grown accustomed to. It was clear, strong, commanding, the voice of the tech mogul who had swept her off her feet 7 years ago at a fashion gala in Manhattan. But Angelina was already backing away, her mind racing faster than her hammering heart. 4 years. 4 years of her life spent bathing him, feeding him, managing his medications, enduring the humiliation of his mother Grace's constant criticism that she wasn't devoted enough, wasn't loving enough, wasn't white enough to properly care for her precious son. 4 years of sleeping on a cot beside his medical bed because he claimed he needed her nearby in case of emergencies. 4 years of watching her fashion design business crumble because she couldn't leave his side for more than 2 hours. "Baby, wait, I can explain." Clint started forward, then seemed to remember he was supposed to be paralyzed. The hesitation was almost comical. Julia clutched a sheet to her chest, her pretty face flushed with more than shame. There was defiance there, a possessiveness that made Angelina's stomach turn. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was established, comfortable, routine. Angelina turned and walked down the hallway, her steps measured, controlled. Behind her, she heard Clint's voice, no longer pretending weakness. "Julia, get my phone, now." The master bedroom she'd converted into a medical suite mocked her with its hospital bed, the mechanical lift she'd learned to operate to move him, the charts where she'd meticulously tracked his medications, his physical therapy exercises that he'd claimed caused unbearable pain. She grabbed her purse, her phone, her car keys. Nothing else. She needed nothing else from this mausoleum of lies. "Angelina, stop." Clint appeared in the doorway, walking, running actually, with perfect ease. "You don't understand. This isn't what it looks like." She finally looked at him, really looked at him. He was muscular in a way that spoke of regular exercise, not the atrophied weakness of a paralyzed man. His skin had a healthy tan, not the pallor of someone who never left the house. How many times had she apologized to visitors for his absence, explaining he was too weak for company? "How long?" Her voice came out steady, surprising them both. "Baby, how long?" Clint's jaw clenched. Behind him, Julia appeared, now dressed in the uniform Angelina had bought for her, playing the maid again. The audacity of it made Angelina's hands shake. "The accident," she said, understanding flooding through her like ice water. "There was never an accident." The accident had happened just 2 weeks after Angelina had signed the contract that would have launched her fashion line into Nordstrom Sachs, Neiman Marcus. She was supposed to fly to Milan for Fashion Week, meet with investors, and finalize deals that would have made her a multi-millionaire in her own right. Instead, she'd received a call that Clint had been in a catastrophic car accident. Severed spinal cord, the doctors said. Paralyzed from the waist down, they said. He'd need round-the-clock care, they said. You were threatened by my success." The words came out as statement, not question. Something flickered in Clint's eyes. Pride, perhaps, at his own cleverness. "The SEC was investigating my trades. I needed to disappear for a while, lay low. And you were about to become too high profile, draw too much attention. It was a solution that solved multiple problems." "Multiple problems," Angelina repeated, tasting bile. "And Julia?" "I hired her 6 months before the accident," Julia said, her chin lifted with cruel pride. "To help manage things while you were occupied. 6 months before. When Angelina's father had been dying of cancer, when she'd been flying back and forth to Atlanta, trying to be there for him while managing her blooming career. Clint had been planning even then. "The insurance money," Angelina said, another piece clicking into place. "The disability payments, the lawsuit against the other driver. $3 million in insurance fraud," Clint said, as if he expected her to be impressed. "Plus the settlement. Plus what I've been able to move in the markets while everyone thinks I'm a vegetable. I'm worth 10 times what I was before the accident, Angelina. We're worth 10 times more." "We're worth nothing," Angelina said. "We're getting divorced." Clint laughed, actually laughed. "With what proof? Every doctor, every specialist, every piece of paper says I'm paralyzed. You try to leave me now, you're the heartless wife abandoning her disabled husband. Try to claim I'm faking, and who's going to believe you? The bitter black woman trying to steal from her helpless white husband? My mother has been documenting your neglect for years. All those times you left me alone, all those medications you forgot to give me on time." The conspiracy was breathtaking in its scope. Every moment of the last 4 years had been orchestrated, choreographed, planned. She'd been living in a stage play, performing a role she didn't know she'd been cast in. "I have the best lawyers in the state," Clint continued. "I have documentation of your mental instability, all those times you cried, broke down, couldn't cope with the stress of caregiving. I have Julia here as a witness to your erratic behavior. You try to leave, you try to fight, and I'll destroy you. You'll be lucky to keep the clothes on your back." Angelina looked at him, this man she'd loved, married, devoted 4 years of her life to serving, and felt something cold and diamond-hard crystallize in her chest. He thought he was smart. He thought he'd planned for everything. He hadn't planned for her. "You're right," she said, letting her shoulders slump in defeat. "You're absolutely right. I'm sorry, it was such a shock." Clint's eyes narrowed, suspicious of her sudden capitulation. "I need some air," Angelina continued, making her voice small, broken. Just let me drive around for an hour, clear my head. I'll come back and we can talk about how to move forward." "Leave your phone," Clint said. She placed it on the dresser without argument. Let him think he'd won. Let him think she was beaten. "1 hour," he said. "Julia will be gone when you get back. We'll figure this out, baby. You'll see. This can work for both of us." Angelina nodded, not trusting her voice. She walked past him, past Julia, down the stairs she'd installed a mechanical lift on for his wheelchair. Through the door she'd widened to accommodate his supposed disability. She got in her car, the practical sedan she'd bought because it was easier to transfer him into, selling her beloved sports car to pay for his medical equipment. She drove exactly 3 blocks before pulling over and using the burner phone she'd bought months ago when Clint's behavior had started to seem strange. When she'd catch Julia in rooms she shouldn't be in, when Clint's mother would smirk at her with cruel satisfaction. Some part of her had known. Some survival instinct had whispered that something was very, very wrong. She dialed the number she'd saved under pizza delivery. "Naomi," she said when her sister answered, "remember that investigative piece you did on insurance fraud? I need your help, and I need the best lawyer you know." "Angie? What's wrong?" "Everything," Angelina said, starting the car again. "And nothing. Nothing's wrong anymore. I'm finally awake." As she drove toward her sister's apartment, Angelina began to plan. Clint thought he was a chess master, but he'd made one crucial error. He'd taught her exactly how cruel, how methodical, how ruthless someone could be in the pursuit of destruction. She would take everything from him, not just his money, not just his reputation, but his freedom, his future, his very identity. And she would do it with a smile on her face, serving him breakfast in bed right up until the moment she served him with papers that would destroy his entire world. The ceramic bowl she'd dropped had been filled with his favorite soup, made from scratch the way his mother had taught her. She'd spent 3 hours making it, despite her aching back, despite her exhaustion, despite the fact that he'd berated her that morning for not ironing his pajamas properly. That was the last meal she would ever make for him with love. Everything from now on would be seasoned with revenge. Chapter 2. The Counter-Strategy. Theodore Whitmore's office didn't look like the lair of a man who had destroyed 17 Fortune 500 executives in court, but perhaps that was the point. The understated elegance that whispered power rather than shouting it. Angelina sat across from him, her spine straight, despite the exhaustion that threatened to pull her under. She'd spent the night at Naomi's apartment, lying awake and cataloguing every strange moment from the past 4 years that now made horrifying sense. The time she'd caught Clint on his phone at 3 a.m. and he'd claimed it was phantom pain keeping him awake. The mysterious bruises on his shoulders that he'd said came from muscle spasms, but now clearly came from Julia's fingernails. The way his mother Grace would study her with calculating eyes, as if measuring how much more Angelina could take before breaking. "Mrs. Eastwood," Theodore began, and something about his voice, deep, measured, careful, made her look at him properly for the first time since Naomi had practically dragged her into his office that morning. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 35, with prematurely silver threads through dark hair that suggested either stress or genetics. His eyes were grey, the kind that seemed to shift between blue and green depending on the light, and they held an intensity that made her understand why Naomi had insisted he was the only lawyer who could handle Clint. "Miss Garner," Angelina corrected. "I never legally changed my name. Clint said it would be complicated with his medical paperwork, but now I'm guessing he wanted to be able to move assets without my name attached to them." Theodore made a note and she noticed his hands, steady, confident, with a thin scar across the left knuckles that suggested this man knew about fighting in ways that went beyond courtrooms. "Tell me everything," he said. "Start from the beginning. Leave nothing out, no matter how insignificant it might seem." So she did. For 3 hours she talked while Theodore listened, occasionally asking clarifying questions that made her realize he wasn't just hearing her. He was building a case, brick by brick, word by word. When she described finding Clint with Julia, Theodore's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. When she explained how Clint had threatened to paint her as an unstable, neglectful wife, something dangerous flashed in those grey eyes. "He's made one significant error," Theodore said when she finally fell silent, throat raw from talking. "Several, actually, but one that will destroy him." "What's that?" "He got comfortable. 4 years of successful deception made him arrogant. The fact that Julia was in your home, that he was walking freely, that tells me he's been taking bigger risks lately. Men like Clint." Theodore paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "They start to believe their own lies. They think they're invincible." "You sound like you know the type." Theodore stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. "My father did something similar to my mother. Not paralysis, but cancer. Faked terminal brain cancer for 2 years while embezzling from their joint businesses. She nursed him, gave up her career as a surgeon, watched him dying by inches. The only difference was he didn't have a Julia. He had a whole other family in Canada." Angelina felt her heart crack for this composed man who understood her pain in ways others couldn't. "What happened?" "My mother found out when she went to donate blood for his supposed surgery and overheard nurses discussing how Mr. Whitmore had been in for his vasectomy reversal the week before, the same week he was supposedly in chemotherapy." Theodore turned back to her, and his professional mask had slipped just enough for her to see the man beneath. She destroyed him, legally, financially, socially. I was 15, watching from the sidelines, learning that justice isn't just about law, it's about strategy, patience, and choosing the right moment to strike. Is that why you became a lawyer? That's why I became this kind of lawyer. He returned to his desk, the mask sliding back into place, but something had shifted between them. A recognition, perhaps. Two people who understood that betrayal from someone you love leaves scars that never quite fade. Now, Theodore said, pulling out a legal pad, we need to discuss strategy. Clint expects you to react emotionally. He's counting on it. Instead, we're going to play a longer game. How long? 3 weeks, maybe 4. You're going to go home today and play the devastated but compliant wife. You're going to let him think he's won, that you're too broken to fight. Meanwhile, we're going to systematically dismantle every lie he's built. I don't know if I can pretend for that long. Looking at him, serving him, knowing what he's done. Theodore leaned forward, and suddenly his presence filled the room. Yes, you can. You're stronger than you know, Miss Garner. You survived 4 years of psychological torture that would have broken most people. You maintained your sanity while being gaslit every single day. 3 more weeks? That's nothing compared to what you've already endured. What will we do in those 3 weeks? First, we're going to hire a private investigator. I have someone I trust completely. They'll document Clint's movements when he thinks you're not watching. Second, we're going to forensically examine your finances. Every transaction, every transfer, every penny he's moved. Third, we're going to find others he's deceived. Men like Clint don't just betray their wives. They betray everyone. Business partners, investors, friends. We're going to find them all. And Julia? Julia is the key. She's young, arrogant, and thinks she's won. That combination makes people careless. She'll make mistakes, and when she does, we'll be watching. Theodore pulled out a phone, clearly not his primary one, and handed it to her. This is encrypted, untraceable. My number is the only one programmed in. If you feel unsafe, if Clint threatens you, if you need to hear that you're not crazy and this is really happening, you call me, day or night. Their fingers brushed as she took the phone, and something electric passed between them. Theodore pulled back as if burned, professional boundaries snapping back into place. There's something else, Angelina said. Clint mentioned the SEC investigation. He said the paralysis was partly to avoid that. Theodore's eyes sharpened. Securities and Exchange Commission? He's been insider trading. I think so. He used to work at Crawford Technologies before starting his own firm. Miles Crawford is still his best friend, or at least Clint thinks he is. They golf together. She stopped. They've been golfing together, while Clint was supposedly paralyzed. Where? The Meridian Country Club. It's private, exclusive, the kind of place that doesn't ask questions if you pay enough. Theodore was already making notes, his handwriting sharp and precise. This is good. This is very good. Securities fraud is federal. If we can prove that, Clint isn't just looking at divorce court, he's looking at federal prison. I want him to lose everything, Angelina said, surprising herself with the venom in her voice. Not just money, everything. I want Julia to see him for what he really is. I want his mother to watch her precious son revealed as a fraud. I want his business partners to know they've been shaking hands with a con artist. We'll do more than that, Theodore promised, and there was something in his voice that made her believe him. But first, you need to go home. Can you do that? Can you walk back into that house and pretend nothing has changed? He took 4 years from me, Angelina said, standing. He killed my father's last months. I missed so much time with him because I was caring for Clint. He destroyed my business, my reputation, my sense of self. Yes, I can pretend for 3 weeks. I can pretend I'm broken if it means breaking him. Theodore stood as well, walking her to the door. You're not alone in this anymore. I need you to remember that. When you're in that house, pretending to be defeated, remember that we're out here, building the case that will destroy him." She turned at the door, looking back at this man who was still largely a stranger, but who understood her pain in ways that felt dangerously intimate. "Why do I trust you? I just met you." "Because you recognize someone else who's been forged in the same fire," Theodore said simply. "And because you know, I understand that justice isn't just about winning, it's about making sure they never forget what it cost to betray someone who loved them." The drive home felt like driving toward a prison, but Angelina forced herself to continue. She parked in the driveway of the house that had become her jail, looking at the wheelchair ramp she'd had installed, the medical van she'd bought, all the external trappings of Clint's elaborate lie. Inside, she found him in his wheelchair, back in his performance. Julia was gone, as promised, but her perfume lingered in the air like a ghost. Grace sat beside him, holding his hand with maternal concern that might have been touching if Angelina hadn't known it was all an act. "Darling," Clint said, his voice back to the weak, slurred tone she'd grown accustomed to. "I was so worried. Mother came as soon as I called." Grace looked at her with those calculating eyes. "Clint tells me you had an episode. Poor dear, the stress of caregiving can cause hallucinations. Perhaps we should look into getting you some help, medical help." They were already laying groundwork to have her committed if necessary. The thoroughness of their evil was almost admirable. "You're right," Angelina said, letting her voice break. "I'm sorry. I don't know what I saw, what I thought I saw. I'm just so tired." "Of course you are," Grace soothed, though her eyes remained cold. "Why don't you make us all some tea? That always calms you down." Angelina nodded and walked to the kitchen where she'd prepared thousands of meals for a man who could walk to restaurants anytime he pleased. As she filled the kettle, she thought of Theodore's grey eyes, the scar on his knuckles, the promise in his voice. 3 weeks. She could survive 3 more weeks. And then she would watch Clint's world burn. Chapter 3. Building the Case. The private investigator Theodore hired looked nothing like what Angelina had expected. Instead of a grizzled ex-cop, Skylar Chen was a 30-year-old MIT graduate who specialized in digital forensics and looked like she could have been one of Angelina's fashion models. "People underestimate pretty Asian women," Skylar explained during their clandestine meeting at a coffee shop 20 miles from home, while Clint believed Angelina was at a grief counseling session for caregivers. "It's amazing what men will say in front of me, thinking I'm just decoration." Theodore sat beside Angelina, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something subtle and expensive that made her think of rain on cedar. He'd been careful to maintain professional distance since that first meeting, but sometimes she caught him looking at her with an expression that suggested he was fighting the same magnetic pull she felt. "What have you found?" Theodore asked, his legal pad ready. Skylar pulled out a tablet, her fingers flying across the screen. "Clint Eastwood is remarkably active for a paralyzed man. In the past 2 weeks alone, he's been recorded on security cameras at 3 different private gyms, always entering through back entrances. He maintains a separate apartment under a shell company called Phoenix Rising LLC. Subtle, right? Julia Foster has her own key." She turned the tablet toward them, showing grainy but clear footage of Clint doing pull-ups, running on a treadmill, lifting weights that would challenge any able-bodied man. The timestamp showed 2 p.m. on a day when Angelina remembered him claiming he needed to rest due to severe pain. "There's more," Skylar continued. "I've tracked financial transactions going back 5 years. The planning for this started before you were even married, Miss Garner. He specifically targeted you." Angelina felt the coffee turn to acid in her stomach. "Targeted me?" "You were featured in Forbes's 30 Under 30 for fashion innovation. Your company was valued at $2 million and growing. You were also notably private about your personal life, estranged from extended family except for Naomi, and had just lost your mother to cancer. In his emails to a friend, which I may have illegally accessed, so we can't use them in court, but they're informative, he called you perfect, beautiful, successful enough to be useful, but isolated enough to be vulnerable. Theodore's hand moved toward Angelina's, stopped, pulled back. She appreciated both the impulse and the restraint. The accident was planned for maximum impact, Schuyler went on. 2 weeks before Milan Fashion Week, the night before your biggest investor meeting, timed so you'd have to choose between your career and being a good wife. He knew you'd choose him. He'd spent 2 years studying you, learning your values, your triggers, your weaknesses. He said he loved me, Angelina whispered. He cried at our wedding. He's a sociopath, Theodore said flatly. They're excellent at mimicking emotions they don't feel. Schuyler swiped to another screen. The SEC investigation was real. He made $17 million on illegal insider trades using information from Miles Crawford. But here's where it gets interesting. Crawford doesn't know Clint can walk. He's been visiting Clint at your home, genuinely believing his best friend is paralyzed. Clint betrayed him too. Clint betrays everyone eventually, which brings us to Julia Foster. Schuyler's smile turned predatory. Sweet, innocent Julia has a history. She's done this before, attached herself to wealthy married men, played the devoted employee or caregiver, then threatened exposure unless they paid her off. She has 3 sealed settlements in other states. So she's not just a mistress, Theodore mused. She's a professional con artist. They found each other, Schuyler confirmed. But here's the beautiful part. They don't trust each other. I've recorded 17 arguments between them in the past week. She wants him to divorce you now and marry her. He keeps stalling. She's getting impatient, sloppy. Last night she posted a photo on Instagram from a restaurant, forgetting that Clint's reflection was visible in her wine glass. I've screenshot everything. Theodore was taking rapid notes. We need financial forensics. Every hidden account, every transaction. Already on it. Schuyler pulled out a thick folder. Clint has been slowly liquidating your joint assets and moving them offshore. The house is mortgaged to the hilt. He took out loans against it without your knowledge, forging your signature. Your retirement accounts have been drained. The medical expenses he's been claiming, they go to a fake medical company he owns. He's essentially been paying himself to be sick. Angelina felt dizzy. How much has he stolen? From you directly? About 800,000? From insurance companies? 3.2 million? From investors through fraud? We're still calculating, but it's in the tens of millions. Jesus, Theodore breathed. Then to Angelina, are you all right? She wasn't. She was drowning in the scope of Clint's deception, but she thought of the morning's humiliation, Clint making her help him with a sponge bath while knowing he'd showered with Julia an hour earlier, and fury steadied her. I'm fine. What else? Schuyler exchanged a glance with Theodore. There's something else, something personal. Do you want to? Tell me. Julia's pregnant. The words hit Angelina like a physical blow. 4 years of Clint refusing intimacy, claiming his paralysis made it impossible, that it caused him too much psychological pain to even try. 4 years of feeling like a failure as a wife because she couldn't even provide that comfort to her disabled husband. And all along, how far? 3 months. Theodore's hand found hers then. Professional boundaries be damned. His touch was warm, grounding, and she held on like it was the only thing keeping her from shattering. This changes our strategy, Theodore said, his voice carefully controlled. A pregnancy means Julia has leverage we didn't account for. She could claim Clint promised to leave you for her, that the child makes her the victim. Or, Schuyler said slowly, we could use it. Proof that Clint's been sexually active while claiming impotence due to paralysis. No jury in the world would sympathize with a man who impregnated his mistress while his wife was washing his supposedly paralyzed body. Angelina pulled her hand from Theodore's, needing to stand, to move, to not scream. She walked to the coffee shop window, watching normal people living normal lives, untouched by this level of betrayal. "There's a part of me that wants to confront him," she admitted. "To rage, to throw things, to make him admit what he's done." "That's exactly what he wants," Theodore said, coming to stand beside her. "He's prepared for your anger. He has contingency plans for your breakdown. What he's not prepared for is your silence, your strategy, your intelligence being used against him instead of in service to him." "How do you stand it?" she asked him quietly. "Knowing what your father did to your mother, seeing these cases every day, how do you still believe in anything?" Theodore was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, softer, more personal than she'd heard it. "I believe in justice, not the kind the law provides, that's often inadequate, but the kind we make for ourselves, the kind that comes from refusing to let cruel people win. And lately," he paused, seeming to weigh his words, "I believe in the strength of people like you. You could have broken. Most would have. Instead, you're here, fighting." She turned to look at him, and for a moment, the coffee shop, Skylar, the evidence of Clint's betrayal, it all faded. There was just Theodore, with his grey eyes and steady presence, looking at her like she was something precious rather than broken. "We should review the legal strategy," Skylar said, breaking the moment. They returned to the table, and Theodore laid out the plan with military precision. File for divorce on grounds of fraud, emotional abuse, and financial malfeasance. Pursue criminal charges for insurance fraud, forgery, and theft. Alert the SEC to his current location and activities. Freeze all accounts before Clint could move more money offshore. "The timing has to be perfect," Theodore explained. "We file everything simultaneously. Divorce papers, criminal complaints, SEC reports. He won't know what hit him, but we need one more week of evidence gathering." "I don't know if I can," Angelina admitted. "This morning, he made me massage his legs, talking about how the circulation was poor, how grateful he was for my gentle touch. Knowing what I know now, knowing about Julia, about the pregnancy." "Look at me," Theodore commanded, and she did. "One more week. I'll be with you every step of the way. Every night you can call me. Tell me about your day, your fears, your anger. Let me carry some of it for you." "That seems beyond legal counsel." "It is," he admitted. "But this stopped being just a case for me the moment you walked into my office. I shouldn't say that. It's unprofessional, but you deserve truth after so many lies. And the truth is, I admire you more than any client I've ever had. Your strength, your dignity, your refusal to be broken. It's extraordinary." Skylar cleared her throat. "I'll keep gathering evidence. Focus on Julia. She's the weak link. When this goes to court, she'll crack." The meeting ended with Angelina feeling both stronger and more fragile. The scope of Clint's betrayal was breathtaking, but she wasn't alone. She had Theodore, with his brilliant legal mind and dangerous eyes. She had Skylar, with her technical expertise and predatory smile. She had Naomi, who called every day to remind her that she was loved. The drive home was easier this time. When she walked in to find Clint in his wheelchair, watching financial news while Julia fed him soup, they weren't even trying to hide it anymore. She managed to smile. "How was counseling, darling?" Clint asked, that false concern in his voice. "Helpful," she said. "I'm learning to accept things I cannot change." He smiled, thinking he'd won. "That's good, baby. That's real good." Julia smirked, her hand resting on her still flat stomach, in a gesture that was clearly meant to wound. "Mrs. Eastwood looks tired. Perhaps she should rest." "You're right," Angelina agreed. "I think I'll lie down." In the bedroom, she pulled out the encrypted phone Theodore had given her. His voice answered on the first ring. "How are you?" "Surviving," she said. "Julia's here. She's touching her stomach, making sure I know." "One more week," he promised. And then we destroy them all. Theodore, she hesitated. What you said today about this being more than a case, I meant it. But nothing happens until you're free, until you're safe, until you've had time to heal. I just needed you to know you're not alone, not in any way. She closed her eyes, holding onto his voice like a lifeline. One more week. She could survive one more week. Chapter 4. The Puppet Master. The discovery came at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, when Angelina couldn't sleep and decided to search for their old wedding photos in Clint's home office, a room she rarely entered because he'd claimed the stairs were too painful for her to push his wheelchair up daily. Hidden behind tax returns in a filing cabinet, she found a leather journal, and what she read by flashlight made her blood turn to ice. Every page was dated, every entry meticulous, and the story they told transformed betrayal into something far more sinister. Entry 1, March 15, 2016. Subject, Angelina Garner. Net worth, $2.1 million. Vulnerabilities, recent mother's death, estranged from extended family, workaholic tendencies suggesting loneliness. Approach strategy, fashion gala next month. Research indicates she favors men who appear powerful but wounded. Practice story about father's death and its impact. Her hands shook as she photographed each page with the encrypted phone Theodore had given her. Entry 87, September 3, 2017. Marriage proceeding on schedule. A, completely devoted, started suggesting children, planted seeds about wanting to wait until financially secure. Need 2 more years to position assets properly. Grace agrees timeline is optimal. Entry 203, January 18, 2019. SEC investigation heating up. Miles getting suspicious about trades. Paralysis plan moved up. Studied videos of spinal injury patients for accurate portrayal. Julia in position as backup. She's proven reliable in previous operations. A will choose caretaking over Milan. Her psychological profile indicates martyrdom complex from mother's cancer. Entry 298, October 2, 2021. 2 years into paralysis performance. A has aged 5 years. Business contacts severed as planned. Isolation 90% complete. Only maintains relationship with sister. May need to create conflict there soon. Physical intimacy excuse has worked perfectly. She blames herself. Grace's psychological harassment on schedule. Angelina photographed faster, bile rising in her throat. Entry 344, December 1st, 2022. A showing signs of breakdown, crying in bathroom for hours, perfect timing for next phase. Hired Julia officially as maid, gaslighting intensified, making her question her memory, perception. Classic destabilization. If she breaks completely, institutionalization is possible. Grace has contacts at Fairhaven Psychiatric. Entry 401, November 15th, 2024. Julia getting impatient. Pregnancy was her idea. Insurance policy, she calls it. Didn't approve, but adaptation necessary. A nearly walked in on us 3 times this month. Getting careless or subconsciously wanting to be caught. Psychology of deception fascinating. Study later. Entry 410, last week. She knows. The broken bowl was perfectly timed, almost artistic, but she's broken. Saw it in her eyes. She'll accept the situation. They always do when properly conditioned. 4 years of systematic psychological destruction can't be undone. She'll take whatever crumbs I offer. The last entry was dated yesterday. Entry 411. A. Playing perfect wife. Knew she would. Already moving final assets to Cayman accounts. Will maintain paralysis another 6 months, then miraculous recovery through new treatment. Divorce A. For emotional distance during recovery. Marry Julia temporarily for appearance. Once SEC statute of limitations passes, eliminate all liabilities. A will be institutionalized or dead by then. Her psychological profile suggests suicide within year of abandonment. Angelina's vision blurred, not from tears, from rage so pure it felt like lightning in her veins. He hadn't just betrayed her, he'd studied her like a lab rat, documented her destruction like a science experiment, planned her death or madness as a footnote in his grand scheme. She photographed the final pages, including contact lists, financial codes, and what appeared to be blackmail material on several prominent businessmen. Then she carefully returned everything exactly as she'd found it. Back in her bedroom, she called Theodore. "It's 3 in the morning," he answered, alert despite the hour. "Are you safe?" "I found his journal." Her voice was steady, cold. He documented everything, every manipulation, every lie, every calculated moment of the last 8 years. "Angelina, he's planning to have me institutionalized or dead within a year." Silence. Then, "I'm coming over." "You can't. He has cameras. Then you come here. Now." "He'll know." "Tell him you're having a panic attack and need to drive. Tell him anything. But you're not staying in that house tonight." The tone in his voice brooked no argument. She dressed quickly, then went to Clint's room where he slept in his medical bed, unnecessary but part of his performance. "Clint," she shook his shoulder. He stirred, eyes focusing with perfect clarity before remembering to appear groggy. "I'm having anxiety. I need to drive around. The counselor said it helps." He studied her, calculating. "Take your phone." "Of course." She took her regular phone, leaving the encrypted one hidden. Let him track her. She was only going to drive around after all. Except she drove straight to Theodore's address, a townhouse in the historic district that spoke of old money and good taste. He was waiting on the porch, dressed in jeans and a sweater, looking younger and more dangerous than his usual suit suggested. "Show me," he said, leading her inside. His home was nothing like she'd expected, warm where his office was cold, filled with books and art and photos of a large, happy family. She sent him the photographs and watched his face transform as he read. "This changes everything," he said quietly. "This isn't just fraud or betrayal. This is conspiracy, premeditated psychological torture, potentially attempted murder if he's serious about the institutionalization plan. He has my psychological evaluation from when I sought therapy after Mom died. He's been using it against me." Theodore poured 2 glasses of whiskey, handed her one. "We're filing tomorrow." "You said we needed another week." "That was before I knew he was escalating toward having you committed. Skylar found something today she hadn't told you yet. Julia's been researching power of attorney laws. They're planning to move soon." Angelina downed the whiskey, feeling it burn. "I want to destroy him." "We will." "No." She turned to face him. "I want to destroy him, not just legally. I want him to feel what I felt. I want him to know what it's like to be studied, manipulated, broken down piece by piece." Theodore moved closer, his eyes dark. "That's dangerous thinking." "I don't care. You could become like him." "No," she said firmly, "because unlike him I loved, really loved. That's the difference. My revenge comes from pain, not pleasure. He enjoyed destroying me. I'll take no pleasure in his destruction, only justice." Theodore's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "You're extraordinary." "I'm broken. Number bent, maybe. Hurt, definitely, but not broken. Broken people don't fight back. Broken people don't stand in my living room at 4 in the morning planning strategic legal warfare." She leaned into his touch, starved for gentleness after years of performative care. When this is over, I'm going to court you properly," he said. "Take you to dinner somewhere that doesn't involve discussing your sociopathic husband. Learn your favorite wine, your favorite music, what makes you laugh. But nothing happens until you're free and clear and have had time to heal." "What if I don't want to wait?" His hand dropped, and he stepped back. Then I'd remind you that you're vulnerable right now, that emotions during trauma aren't always reliable, and that you deserve someone who puts your well-being above their desires." She laughed, surprising them both. "You're a good man, Theodore Whitmore. I'm a lawyer. We're never good men. But I try to be decent." "Kiss me," she said suddenly, "just once, so I can remember what it feels like to be wanted by someone who sees me as a person, not a bank account or a psychological experiment." "Angelina, please. I haven't been touched with genuine affection in 4 years. I need to remember I'm human." He studied her for a long moment, then stepped forward, his hands framing her face with infinite gentleness. The kiss was soft, careful, a question rather than a demand. She answered by pressing closer, and for a moment the world consisted only of Theodore's warmth, his strength, the steady beat of his heart under her palm. When they separated, both were breathing unsteadily. "That's all we can have right now," he said roughly. "But when this is over, when you're free, I plan to kiss you until you forget every moment of pain he caused." "Promise?" "I promise. Now we need to strategize. If we're filing tomorrow, we need everything in place. Can you go back tonight? Play normal for one more day?" "After that kiss, I could conquer armies." He smiled, and it transformed his face. "Then let's plan a war." They spent the remaining hours until dawn, reviewing evidence, planning filing strategies, coordinating with Skylar. Theodore would file for divorce at 9 a.m., criminal charges at 9:15, SEC complaint at 9:30. By 10 a.m., Clint's accounts would be frozen, his passport flagged, his entire world crumbling. What about Julia? Skylar has something special planned for her. Apparently, one of her previous victims is very interested in testifying about her patterns. As the sun rose, Angelina prepared to return to her prison one last time. 24 hours, Theodore promised. In 24 hours, you'll be free. And in 24 hours and 1 minute, I'll be waiting. She drove home to find Clint awake in his wheelchair with Grace beside him. "Where were you?" Grace demanded. "Driving, as I said." "For 4 hours?" "Yes." Clint studied her with those calculating eyes. "You seem different." "The counseling is helping," she lied smoothly. "I'm learning acceptance." He smiled, that cold, satisfied smile she now recognized from years of manipulation. "Good. Julia's making breakfast. Go help her." In the kitchen, Julia stood at the stove, her hand on her stomach, humming. She looked up when Angelina entered, smirking. "Sleep well?" Julia asked sweetly. "Better than I have in years," Angelina answered honestly. Julia's smirk faltered at something in Angelina's tone, but before she could respond, Angelina's phone buzzed. A text from Theodore, just 3 words. "Documents filed. Run." But Angelina didn't run. Instead, she smiled at Julia, picked up the coffee pot, and poured 4 cups with steady hands. "Actually, Julia, why don't you sit down? You're pregnant after all. I'll serve breakfast." As she carried the tray to the dining room where Clint waited in his unnecessary wheelchair, she thought of Theodore's kiss, of justice racing through court systems, of freedom measured in minutes rather than years. "Here you go, darling," she said to Clint, setting down his coffee. "Enjoy it while it lasts." He frowned at her words, but before he could respond, the doorbell rang. Then rang again. Then came the pounding. "Police! Open up! We have a warrant!" The coffee cup slipped from Clint's suddenly nerveless fingers, shattering on the floor. And Angelina laughed, really laughed, for the first time in 4 years. Chapter 5. The Chess Game. The courtroom smelled of old wood and fresh lies. Clint had arrived in his wheelchair, wearing a custom suit tailored to make him appear frail, his mother Grace pushing him with theatrical concern, while Julia walked behind in a conservative dress meant to hide her pregnancy and project innocence. Angelina sat beside Theodore, her spine straight, wearing the red designer suit she'd created 6 years ago. The one she'd worn to the Forbes photo shoot before Clint had entered her life like a cancer. Theodore had suggested it, understanding the symbolism of reclaiming who she'd been before the destruction. "He's good," Theodore murmured, watching Clint's performance as reporters gathered outside. The concerned husband, betrayed by his wife's abandonment during his time of need. "He's had 4 years of practice," Angelina replied, her voice steady despite the rage simmering beneath her composure. Judge Charlotte Bennett entered, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes that suggested she'd seen enough theater in her courtroom to recognize performance. Angelina felt a spark of hope. Clint's lawyer, Harrison Vale, stood first. Vale was known for defending the indefensible, celebrities who'd committed heinous crimes, politicians caught in corruption, billionaires who thought laws were suggestions. His presence meant Clint was taking this seriously. "Your Honor," Vale began, his voice rich with false sympathy, "we're here today because a devoted husband, paralyzed and dependent, has been abandoned by a wife who grew tired of her caretaking duties. Mr. Eastwood has been served with divorce papers, accused of crimes that are not only false, but physically impossible for a man in his condition." Theodore stood slowly, deliberately. "Your Honor, we're here because Mr. Eastwood has perpetrated one of the most elaborate frauds this court will ever see. We have evidence that he has been faking paralysis for 4 years while conducting affairs, insider trading, and systematically destroying my client's life and career." "That's preposterous," Vale interrupted. "My client has medical records from 17 different specialists confirming his paralysis. 17 specialists who never performed a single nerve conduction study," Theodore countered. 17 specialists who relied entirely on Mr. Eastwood's self-reported symptoms and MRI scans that we'll prove were falsified. Judge Bennett raised a hand. "Mr. Vale, is your client capable of standing?" "Absolutely not, Your Honor. The suggestion is cruel. Then he won't mind if I ask him to try." The judge's voice was steel. "Mr. Eastwood, please attempt to stand." Clint's performance was masterful. He gripped the armrests of his wheelchair, his face contorting with effort and pain. His arms shook, sweat beaded on his forehead. After 30 seconds of apparent struggle, he collapsed back, breathing heavily. "You see," Vale said triumphantly, "to force him through this humiliation, I see a man who goes to gyms at midnight." Theodore interrupted, pulling out his tablet. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit security footage from Apex Fitness dated last Tuesday at 2 a.m. The courtroom watched as crystal-clear footage showed Clint walking into a gym, scanning a membership card, and proceeding to run on a treadmill for 45 minutes. The silence was deafening. Clint's face had gone pale, but Vale recovered quickly. "That's clearly doctored footage, deep fake technology. From 17 different locations over 6 months?" Theodore asked mildly. "Including the Meridian Country Club, where Mr. Eastwood has been playing golf every Thursday with Miles Crawford." "Objection!" Vale shouted. "These alleged videos haven't been authenticated." "Then let's authenticate them now," Theodore said. "I call Miles Crawford to the stand." Angelina watched Clint's face as his best friend entered the courtroom. Miles looked confused, conflicted, glancing between Clint in his wheelchair and Theodore at the podium. "Mr. Crawford," Theodore began after Miles was sworn in, "you're Mr. Eastwood's business partner and friend, correct?" "Yes." "Have you been playing golf with him?" Miles hesitated, looking at Clint. No. Clint's paralyzed. He can't play golf." "Mr. Crawford, you're under oath. Perjury is a felony. I'll ask again. Have you been playing golf with Clint Eastwood at the Meridian Country Club?" The silence stretched. Clint was shaking his head slightly, trying to signal Miles, but it was too late. "I thought it was therapy," Miles said finally. "He said it was experimental treatment, that he could walk for short periods, but didn't want to give Angelina false hope until he knew it was permanent. When did this therapy begin? About 3 years ago. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Grace's perfectly composed face cracked slightly. Julia's hand went to her stomach in an unconscious protective gesture. 3 years ago, Theodore repeated. And you believed a paralyzed man was secretly recovering but hiding it from his devoted wife. He said the doctors advised it, said the stress of hope and disappointment would be too much for her. Mr. Crawford, did Clint ever discuss his financial transactions with you during these golf games? Vale shot to his feet. Objection. Relevance. Goes to the broader fraud, Your Honor, Theodore said smoothly. I'll allow it. Miles was sweating now. He mentioned some investments. Investments based on information you shared about your company's pending mergers? I didn't think he was my best friend. Information that allowed him to make $17 million in illegal trades. Objection, Vale roared. But the damage was done. Miles looked at Clint with dawning horror. You used me. You've been walking for 3 years, and you used me. Miles, Clint started to speak, forgetting to slur his words. The courtroom erupted. Judge Bennett banged her gavel repeatedly. Order! Mr. Eastwood, did you just speak without your supposed speech impediment? Clint's mask finally slipped, revealing the cold calculation beneath. He looked at Theodore with pure hatred, then at Angelina with something worse, possession, as if she was property that had malfunctioned. I invoke my Fifth Amendment rights, he said clearly, no trace of weakness in his voice. How convenient, Theodore said dryly. Your Honor, we'd like to call our next witness, Julia Foster. Julia stood shakily, her hand still on her stomach. As she walked to the stand, Angelina noticed her confidence had evaporated. The young woman who'd smirked while serving breakfast looked terrified. Miss Foster, Theodore began after she was sworn in, you're pregnant, correct? Yes. Who is the father? Julia's eyes darted to Clint. I invoke my Fifth Amendment rights. You're not on trial, Miss Foster. You've been granted immunity in exchange for testimony. Now who is the father? Clint, she whispered. Clint Eastwood? The paralyzed man who claimed he couldn't be intimate with his wife due to his condition. He was never paralyzed, Julia said, her voice stronger now. It was all an act. He hired me before the fake accident to help manage things while he hid from the SEC. You knew it was fraud? He said his wife was abusive, that she'd married him for money, that he needed to protect himself. Julia was crying now, mascara running. He said he loved me, that we'd be together once he got rid of her. Got rid of her? Julia pulled out her phone with shaking hands. He sent me this last week. She played a voice message, Clint's voice clear and cold. The institutionalization papers are almost ready. A few more weeks of gaslighting and she'll have a complete breakdown. Then we can have her committed, I get power of attorney and we're free. Just play your part a little longer. Angelina felt Theodore's hand brush hers under the table, grounding her as her world tilted. Even knowing Clint's evil, hearing it stated so boldly was devastating. Your Honor, Theodore said, I move for immediate judgment. Mr. Eastwood has clearly... I can walk, Clint said suddenly, standing from his wheelchair with fluid grace. The courtroom gasped collectively. But she drove me to it. Clint, sit down, Vale hissed. But Clint was beyond strategy now, his narcissism demanding center stage. 4 years I had to pretend to be weak because she was too successful, too independent. She emasculated me with her success, her ambition. What choice did I have but to bring her down to size? You had the choice not to commit fraud, Judge Bennett said coldly. Not to fake a disability, not to steal from insurance companies and investors, not to psychologically torture your wife. She's not my wife, Clint spat. She's my employee. I paid for her with attention, with fake love, with a wedding ring. She owed me service. Even Vale looked disgusted. Grace had her head in her hands. Julia was sobbing. "I've heard enough," Judge Bennett said. "Mr. Eastwood, you're remanded into custody pending criminal charges. This divorce is granted with extreme prejudice. All assets are awarded to Mrs. Garner." "Miss Garner," Angelina corrected quietly. "I never took his name." "Miss Garner," the judge continued with what might have been approval, "including damages for emotional distress, lost wages, and fraud. Mr. Vale, I suggest you advise your client to seek a criminal attorney. This court is referring all evidence to the district attorney and the SEC." Security officers moved toward Clint, who looked around wildly, his careful construction finally crumbling. "You can't do this. I'm Clint Eastwood. I own judges. I own this city." "You own nothing," Theodore said quietly. "You are nothing, and everyone knows it now." As they led Clint away in handcuffs, he lunged toward Angelina, screaming obscenities. Theodore stepped between them instantly, protective and solid. "You'll pay for this," Clint shouted. "I'll destroy you." "You already tried," Angelina said, finding her voice at last. "You failed." The courtroom emptied slowly, reporters shouting questions that Angelina ignored. Grace approached hesitantly. "I didn't know," the older woman said. "I thought he was really hurt. I thought you weren't taking good enough care of him." "I'm sorry." Angelina studied her former mother-in-law, seeing an old woman who'd been deceived by her own son. "He fooled everyone, Grace, even you." Julia was the last to approach, mascara-streaked and visibly pregnant. "I'm sorry. He told me you were cruel, that you deserved it. I was stupid." "You were 24 and manipulated by a master," Angelina said, surprising herself with compassion. "Get help, Julia. For yourself and your child, don't let him poison another generation." Outside the courthouse, Theodore walked Angelina to his car, his hand on her back, protective and warm. "It's over," he said. "The legal part," she agreed. "The healing will take longer." "I know, but you don't have to heal alone." She looked at him, this man who'd fought for her, believed in her, seen her as more than victim or survivor, but as a warrior. "Take me home?" she asked. "Your home or mine?" "Yours," she said without hesitation. That house was never home. It was a stage for his performance. As they drove away from the courthouse, Angelina didn't look back. Clint was in custody, Julia was facing her own consequences, and Grace would have to reconcile with the son she'd never really known. But Angelina was free, financially, legally, emotionally free. The money didn't matter. She could rebuild her fashion empire. The revenge didn't matter. It was hollow compared to liberation. What mattered was the man beside her, driving carefully through traffic, giving her space to breathe while making sure she knew she wasn't alone. "Theodore? Yes? That promise you made, about kissing me until I forget every moment of pain." His hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I remember. I'm going to hold you to it." "Good," he said, and his smile was like sunlight after 4 years of darkness. "Because I always keep my promises." Chapter 6. The Unmasking. The federal courthouse was a different beast entirely from the family court, where Clint's initial downfall had begun. Here, the FBI had taken interest, the SEC had mobilized, and Clint's empire was being dissected with surgical precision. 2 weeks had passed since the divorce hearing. Angelina had spent them in a strange limbo, free but not yet whole, vindicated but not yet healed. Theodore had been patient, present but not pressing, offering support while maintaining boundaries she was grateful for even as she yearned to cross them. Today, Julia Foster would testify under immunity, and Angelina had chosen to attend, despite Theodore's gentle suggestion that she didn't need to subject herself to more pain. "I need to hear it all," she'd told him. "Every lie needs to be dragged into the light, or I'll always wonder what else there was." The courtroom was packed with reporters, FBI agents, and several men in expensive suits who Angelina recognized as Clint's former business associates, all here to see if they'd be implicated in his schemes. Julia looked different, older somehow, though only weeks had passed. Her pregnancy was showing now, and she wore a simple black dress that made her look like what she was, a young woman who'd gotten in far over her head. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Elizabeth Harper, began with surprising gentleness. "Miss Foster, please tell the court how you met Mr. Eastwood." Julia's voice was steady but quiet. "Through an agency. Not an employment agency, a different kind. I specialized in arrangements with wealthy men." "You were an escort?" "A companion. I provided company, attended events, made men feel important. Sex was sometimes involved, but not always. Clint hired me initially for a business dinner where he needed a date." "When was this?" "January 2019, 6 months before his supposed accident." Angelina felt Theodore's hand find hers. She'd known the timeline, but hearing it confirmed still stung. "What happened at that dinner?" "He was watching his wife the whole time," Julia said, glancing at Angelina with what might have been apology. "She was across the restaurant with clients, closing some big fashion deal. He kept talking about how she thought she was better than him, how she didn't need him anymore, how he'd fix that." "Did he elaborate?" "Not then, but he hired me again, regularly, always when Angelina was traveling for business. He'd rant about her success, her independence, how she didn't worship him the way a wife should. He said she was too strong, too ambitious, that black women didn't know their place." The courtroom stirred at the racial element. Angelina kept her face neutral, but inside, another piece clicked into place. She'd always wondered why Grace's criticisms had felt tinged with something beyond mere disapproval. "When did he tell you about the paralysis plan?" "April 2019. He said he'd found a way to clip her wings. He'd fake an accident, make her his caretaker, destroy her business and confidence until she was completely dependent on him. Then, when she was broken enough, he'd reveal the truth, and she'd be too destroyed to fight back." "And you agreed to help?" Julia's composure cracked. "He offered me $500,000 and promised that when he divorced her, we'd marry and I'd get half of everything. I was 21, waiting tables, drowning in student loans. It seemed like a fairy tale." "Did you know about the insurance fraud?" "Not at first. He told me that part later, after I was already involved. By then, I was afraid to back out. He said if I betrayed him, he'd destroy me like he was destroying her." Elizabeth introduced evidence, emails between Clint and Julia, planning sessions, financial transfers. One email made Angelina's blood run cold. "The beautiful thing is she loves me, that love is her weakness. Every time she bathes my paralyzed body, every time she apologizes for not being intimate enough, every time she cries in the bathroom thinking I can't hear. It's delicious. She's destroying herself trying to save me." "Miss Foster, this email suggests you were both taking pleasure in Miss Garner's pain." "I thought I was," Julia admitted, tears flowing now. "He made it seem like a game, like she deserved it. He showed me articles about her success and said, 'Imagine thinking you're better than a white man with 3 times your net worth.' He made her seem arrogant, cruel. It wasn't until I saw her every day, saw how devoted she was, how she gave up everything for him, that I realized we were the monsters." "But you continued the deception." "I was pregnant by then. He said if I didn't play along, he'd claim I raped him while he was paralyzed, that I was a predator taking advantage of a disabled man. Who would believe me over him?" The prosecutor introduced more evidence. Videos Clint had secretly recorded of Angelina crying, breaking down, which he'd shared with Julia like trophies. Recordings of him practicing his paralyzed voice, perfecting the slur, the weakness. Photos from his hidden apartment, where he lived his real life while Angelina slept on a cot beside his medical bed. There's one more thing, Julia said suddenly. Something I haven't told anyone. Elizabeth looked surprised but nodded. Go ahead. He has other victims, 3 other women before Angelina. He didn't fake paralysis with them, but he destroyed them in other ways. One he convinced she was going insane, had her committed. Another he framed for embezzlement at his company. The third killed herself. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly. Angelina felt the world tilt, Theodore's arm coming around her automatically. Do you have proof? Elizabeth asked when order was restored. Julia pulled out a flash drive. He kept records, like trophies, videos, photos, documents. He called it his collection. The screen in the courtroom lit up with file names: Sarah's breakdown, Marcus' frame job, Victoria's final days. Each file contained meticulous documentation of psychological torture, financial manipulation, and systematic destruction. Your Honor, Elizabeth said, we need to suspend this hearing. These are evidence of multiple felonies across state lines. The FBI needs to... Already on it, a voice called from the back. FBI agents were moving through the courtroom. Clint, who'd been sitting in custody orange instead of his performed paralysis, finally spoke. You stupid bitch, he screamed at Julia. You were nothing, a whore I pulled from the gutter. I made you. You made me a monster, Julia said quietly, but at least I can recognize it. You still think you're the hero of this story. As the FBI began processing the new evidence, court was adjourned in chaos. Theodore guided Angelina out through a side door, away from the reporters screaming questions. In his car, Angelina finally broke, not with tears, but with rage so pure it felt like fire. 3 other women, 1 dead, and I thought I was special, that at least the evil he did to me was unique. You are special, Theodore said firmly. You survived. You fought back. You're the reason he's facing justice. Victoria didn't survive. No, he agreed quietly. And that's on Clint, not you. But you're giving Victoria justice too now. Sarah and Marcus as well. I want to meet them. Sarah and Marcus, if they're willing. I'll arrange it if they are. But first, you need to process this. They drove to Theodore's house, where Naomi was waiting with tea and fierce hugs. The sisters sat together while Theodore gave them space, and Angelina told Naomi everything. I'm going to kill him, Naomi said calmly. I'm going to walk into that jail and... No, Angelina said. He'd win then. He'd have destroyed another life. We're going to let justice handle him, and then we're going to forget he ever existed. Can you do that? Forget. Angelina thought of Theodore in the next room, giving her space but ready the moment she needed him. Thought of her fashion business, waiting to be rebuilt. Thought of the life she could have now that the shadow was lifted. Not forget, but move past. Build something so beautiful that his ugliness becomes insignificant in comparison. That evening, as Naomi left and the sun set over the city, Theodore found Angelina on his back porch, watching the sky turn colors she hadn't noticed in 4 years. The FBI says with the new evidence, he's looking at life in prison, he said, sitting beside her. Good. Julia will probably get probation and mandatory therapy. She's young, she can rebuild. And you? Angelina turned to look at him. This man who'd been her sword and shield, who'd believed her when the world would have doubted, who'd waited patiently while she found her strength again. I'm going to rebuild my fashion empire. I'm going to therapy to process what happened. I'm going to travel to Milan like I should have 4 years ago. Sounds like a good plan. And, she continued, moving closer to him, I'm going to let myself be loved by a good man, if he's still interested. Theodore's hand came up to cup her face, his touch infinitely gentle. He's very interested, but he's also willing to wait until you're ready. I've waited 4 years to feel human again. I don't want to wait anymore. This kiss was different from their first, deeper, hungrier, full of promise rather than comfort. When they separated, Both were breathing hard. "I should warn you," Theodore said against her lips. "I'm not an easy man to be with. I work too much. I've been told I'm emotionally unavailable, and I have a tendency to go full warrior when someone threatens people I care about." "Good," Angelina said, pulling him back for another kiss. "Because I'm not an easy woman either. I'm building an empire. I have trust issues that will take years to fully resolve, and I refuse to ever be anyone's caretaker again." "Sounds perfect," he murmured, and kissed her again as the stars came out above them, witnesses to something new being born from the ashes of what had been destroyed. Inside, her phone buzzed with messages from reporters, from old clients reaching out in support, from investors interested in her relaunch. Tomorrow, she'd face them all. Tomorrow, she'd begin the actual work of rebuilding. But tonight, she was just a woman being held by a man who saw her strength and her scars and found both beautiful. And for the first time in 4 years, that was enough. Chapter 7. The Mother's Gambit. Grace Eastwood took the stand like a queen approaching her execution, head high, shoulders back, but with the unmistakable air of someone who knew their reign was ending. 3 weeks had passed since Julia's explosive testimony. The FBI had uncovered 2 more victims in different states, and Clint's charges had multiplied like a virus. But today was Grace's turn, the mother who'd either been complicit or blind, and the courtroom was eager to know which. Angelina sat between Theodore and Naomi, drawing strength from their presence. She'd debated not attending, but Theodore had gently suggested that seeing Grace exposed might provide closure she didn't know she needed. The prosecutor, Elizabeth Harper, approached Grace with the careful respect due to age, but with eyes that promised no mercy for crimes. "Mrs. Eastwood, you visited your son regularly during his supposed paralysis?" "Every day," Grace replied, her cultured voice steady. "A mother's duty." "And in 4 years, you never suspected he could walk?" Grace's pause was telling. "I believed my son." "That's not what I asked. Did you suspect?" Another pause. Sometimes. Things seemed inconsistent, but Clint explained them away. Elizabeth introduced evidence, security footage from Grace's own home, dated 2 years into the paralysis, showing Clint walking through her back door at midnight. "Can you explain this, Mrs. Eastwood?" Grace's composed mask cracked slightly. He said it was a miracle, temporary recovery that he didn't want to tell Angelina about until he was sure it would last. "And you believed that?" "I wanted to believe it. Or you were part of it." Elizabeth's voice sharpened. "Financial records show you received monthly payments of $50,000 from accounts tied to the insurance fraud. Care to explain?" Grace's lawyer objected, but the judge overruled. The evidence was clear. Grace had been profiting from her son's deception. "Clint said it was from his investments," Grace said weakly. "Investments he couldn't manage while paralyzed. He had Julia helping the maid. You knew Julia was more than a maid, didn't you?" Grace's silence spoke volumes. Elizabeth introduced a recording, Grace's voice clear and cold. "That woman needs to learn her place. She thinks because she had some little fashion business, she's our equal. At least this paralysis has taught her proper devotion, though frankly, a white woman would have been more naturally suited to caregiving." Angelina felt Naomi's hand tighten on hers, Theodore's quiet intake of breath. But she remained still, letting the poison be drawn out into the light. "Mrs. Eastwood," Elizabeth continued, "did you actively participate in gaslighting Miss Garner?" "I don't know what you mean." "Let me be specific. Did you hide her medications, move her belongings, and then suggest she was becoming forgetful from stress?" "That was Clint's idea." Grace stopped, realizing what she'd admitted. "So you knew? You knew he could walk, knew it was fraud, and you helped torture a woman whose only crime was loving your son." Grace's composure finally shattered completely. "You don't understand. He's my only child. His father left us with nothing. Clint promised to take care of me, but then he married her. She spat the last word like venom. This successful, beautiful black woman who made him feel inferior. He said if we didn't break her, she'd leave him and take everything. So you helped break her instead? I helped my son. You helped your son commit federal crimes. You helped your son psychologically torture an innocent woman. You watched Miss Garner deteriorate over 4 years and felt no compassion. She was too strong, Grace said, and there was something almost admiring in her tone. No matter what we did, she kept caring for him, kept loving him. It was frustrating. Frustrating? Elizabeth's voice could have frozen fire. A woman's refusal to break under systematic abuse was frustrating. Theodore stood suddenly. Your Honor, may I? The judge looked surprised but nodded. Mr. Whitmore, you're not the prosecutor in this case. No, but I have evidence relevant to Mrs. Eastwood's involvement that the prosecution hasn't yet introduced. Elizabeth looked curious but gestured for him to continue. Theodore pulled out a tablet. 6 months ago, Grace Eastwood attempted to have Miss Garner involuntarily committed to Fairhaven Psychiatric Facility. She filed papers claiming Miss Garner was delusional, violent, and a danger to her disabled son. Angelina hadn't known this. She turned to stare at Theodore, who squeezed her hand apologetically for the surprise. The commitment was denied because the psychiatrist who evaluated Miss Garner found her completely sane, if understandably depressed. But here's the interesting part. Grace had already paid Fairhaven a $100,000 donation to ensure Miss Garner would be kept in their maximum security wing indefinitely. The courtroom erupted. Even the judge looked shocked. Furthermore, Theodore continued over the noise, I have emails between Grace and the facility's director discussing chemical restraints that would be used to keep Miss Garner manageable. The plan was to declare her incompetent, seize her remaining assets, and split them between Grace and Clint. You're lying, Grace shrieked. That's not... I would never... Your Honor, Theodore said calmly. I'd like to submit these emails, the financial transfers, and a sworn affidavit from Dr. James Morrison, the psychiatrist who refused to sign the commitment papers and subsequently reported the attempted bribery to the medical board. As the evidence was submitted, Grace seemed to age 10 years in moments. Her carefully maintained exterior crumbled, revealing something ugly and desperate beneath. You have to understand, she said, her voice breaking. I was going to lose everything. My house, my position in society, everything. Clint promised if I helped I'd be secure. I'm 70 years old. What was I supposed to do? Not participate in attempted kidnapping and false imprisonment, Elizabeth said dryly. Mrs. Eastwood, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted kidnapping, and conspiracy to commit false imprisonment. As federal agents approached Grace, she turned to Angelina with wild eyes. This is your fault. If you'd just been a proper wife, none of this would have happened. If you'd known your place, my place, Angelina said, standing for the first time, her voice carrying across the courtroom, was never beneath your son. My place was never as his servant or his victim. My place is exactly where I am now, free, successful, and watching justice finally be served. Grace was led away in handcuffs, her protests echoing through the courthouse. The remaining business associates of Clint's looked shell-shocked, realizing the depth of the conspiracy they'd been adjacent to. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, but Theodore and Naomi formed a protective barrier around Angelina. Miss Garner, how does it feel to see your mother-in-law arrested? Miss Garner, will you be suing the psychiatric facility? Miss Garner, what's next for you? Angelina stopped, turned to the cameras, and spoke clearly. What's next is rebuilding. My business, my life, my faith in humanity. Clint and Grace Eastwood tried to destroy me because they saw my strength as a threat. They failed. And to anyone else out there who's being gaslit, abused, or manipulated by someone who claims to love them, you're not crazy, you're not alone, and you're stronger than they want you to believe. Theodore's hand found hers as they walked to his car, and she didn't pull away despite the cameras. Let them see. Let everyone know that she'd found something real in the ashes of what had been false. That evening, in Theodore's living room with Naomi, Skylar, and surprisingly Miles Crawford, who'd come to apologize, Angelina felt the strange lightness that came with vindication. "I'm testifying against him," Miles said quietly. "I know it won't undo the damage, but I want to help make sure he never gets out." "Why?" Angelina asked. "Because I thought I knew him. 20 years of friendship, and I never saw the monster. If I'd looked closer, if I'd questioned the golf games, the miraculous recovery sessions, maybe I could have helped you sooner." "You couldn't have known," Angelina said, surprising herself with the forgiveness. "He fooled everyone." "Not everyone," Skylar interjected. "Theodore suspected something was off from your first meeting. Said your description of Clint's symptoms didn't match actual paralysis." Angelina looked at Theodore. "You knew from the beginning?" "I suspected. The selective nature of his paralysis, the convenient timing, the way his mother treated you. It all felt performed. But suspicion isn't proof. We needed evidence." "Which we now have in abundance," Skylar grinned. "By the way, Julia's had her baby, a girl. She's named her Victoria, after Clint's victim who didn't survive." "That's actually beautiful," Naomi said softly. "She's agreed to testify in every trial, federal and state," Skylar continued. "She wants to atone, she says." As the evening wore on and the others left, Angelina found herself alone with Theodore on his back porch, their spot for difficult conversations and quiet moments. "You didn't tell me about the psychiatric facility," she said, not accusingly but curiously. "I wanted to have ironclad evidence first, and I didn't want to add to your trauma until I was sure. Was I wrong?" "You protected me while making sure justice was served. That's a rare combination. You know there will be more trials, federal charges, state charges, civil suits. This could go on for years." "I know. And I'll be with you through all of it, if you want me." Angelina turned to face him fully. "Theodore, I need to say something." He tensed slightly, and she realized he was expecting her to pull away to say she needed space. "I love you," she said instead, watching his eyes widen. "Not because you saved me. I saved myself. Not because you're my lawyer. You're so much more. I love you because you see me, all of me, the broken parts and the strong parts, and you never try to fix me or diminish me. You just stand beside me." Theodore's response was to pull her into a kiss that was gentle and fierce simultaneously, pouring 3 months of careful restraint and growing love into the connection. "I love you too," he said against her lips. "I have since you sat in my office that first day, refusing to cry, refusing to break, refusing to be anything less than magnificent, despite everything you'd endured." They stayed on the porch as the stars came out, planning a future that had nothing to do with trials or revenge. Angelina would relaunch her fashion line next month, with 3 major retailers already committed. Theodore would continue his practice, but was considering teaching, passing on his knowledge to the next generation of attorneys who fought for the victimized. "There's something else," Theodore said eventually. "Sarah and Marcus, Clint's other victims, they want to meet you. They're starting a support group for survivors of elaborate fraud and gaslighting. They'd like you to be part of it." "Yes," Angelina said immediately. "Yes, absolutely. You don't have to decide right." "Theodore, I spent 4 years thinking I was alone, that I was crazy, that no one would believe me. If I can help even one person avoid that isolation, then everything I went through has meaning." He held her closer, and she felt the last of her walls crumble. Not the walls that protected her, those she'd keep, having earned them through survival. But the walls that prevented her from being fully present, fully trusting, fully alive. Tomorrow, Grace would be arraigned. Next week, Clint's federal trial would begin. There would be more revelations, more pain dredged up, more moments where the scar tissue would ache. But tonight, Angelina Garner was free, loved, and learning to breathe again. And that was more than enough. It was everything. Chapter 8. The Testimony of Truth. The federal courtroom was standing room only. 4 months had passed since Clint's arrest, and this was the main event. Angelina would take the stand to testify about 4 years of psychological torture, fraud, and attempted destruction. She stood before the mirror in the witness preparation room, wearing a suit she'd designed herself, deep purple, the color of royalty, and bruises healed. Theodore stood behind her, his presence solid and reassuring. "You don't have to do this," he said for the 10th time. "The evidence is overwhelming without your testimony." "Yes, I do," she replied, meeting his eyes in the mirror. "Not for the conviction. You're right, that's assured. But for me, for the woman who spent 4 years doubting her own sanity. She deserves to have her truth spoken aloud in a court of law." Theodore's hands settled on her shoulders, warm and steady. "Then speak it, every word. Leave nothing in the shadows." Elizabeth Harper knocked and entered. "They're ready for you." The walk to the courtroom felt both endless and too brief. Clint sat at the defense table, no longer pretending paralysis, wearing an expensive suit that couldn't hide the orange jumpsuit underneath. He'd lost weight, his face gaunt, but his eyes still held that calculating coldness. As Angelina took the oath, her hand steady on the Bible, she felt the weight of the moment. Not just her story, but Sarah's, Marcus's, Victoria's, and any unknown victims who might be listening. "Miss Garner," Elizabeth began, "please tell the court how you met the defendant." Angelina's voice came out clear, stronger than she'd expected. "At a fashion gala in Manhattan, March 2016. I'd just been featured in Forbes. He approached me with congratulations, said he'd been following my career." What happened next? "He courted me intensively, flowers daily, surprise trips, constant attention. He learned everything about me, my mother's recent death, my father's illness, my dreams for my company. Looking back, it was reconnaissance, not romance." "When did you marry?" "September 2017. A small ceremony. He said he preferred intimate gatherings. Really, he didn't want many witnesses to his performance." "Tell us about the accident." Angelina took a breath, feeling Theodore's supportive presence in the gallery. "May 15th, 2019. I was supposed to fly to Milan for Fashion Week. The night before, I received a call that Clint had been in a catastrophic accident. The doctor, who I now know was paid off, said he was paralyzed from the waist down." "What did you do?" "I cancelled everything. Milan, investor meetings, my entire life. I devoted myself to his care." "Can you describe a typical day during those 4 years?" This was the hard part, the minutiae of manipulation that sounded almost mundane but had nearly destroyed her. "I woke at 5 a.m. to prepare his medications. 23 pills that I now know were mostly vitamins and placebos. I'd help him to the bathroom. He insisted I support his full weight, which I now understand was him enjoying my physical strain. Breakfast had to be exactly right. The eggs couldn't touch the toast. The coffee had to be 147 degrees. If anything was wrong, he'd have spasms that he blamed on my carelessness." "Continue." "I'd bathe him." Her voice caught slightly, but she pushed through. "He insisted only I could do it properly. He'd make me wash him intimately while apologizing that he couldn't be a real husband. He'd cry sometimes, these crocodile tears about failing me as a man. I'd comfort him, tell him it didn't matter, that I loved him regardless. He'd look away like he was ashamed, but I now know he was hiding laughter." Clint shifted in his seat, his jaw clenched. "Good, let him hear it." Physical therapy came next. I'd move his legs through exercises while he screamed in fake pain. If I suggested a professional therapist, he'd accuse me of wanting to abandon him. His mother would visit during lunch, criticizing everything, how I'd dressed him, how I'd styled his hair, how my presence was probably hindering his recovery because I was too aggressive in my caregiving. How did this affect your business? I lost everything. Clients couldn't rely on someone who cancelled meetings for medical emergencies. Emergencies Clint would fake whenever I had important calls. Investors pulled out when I missed Milan. My employees had to find other jobs. 4 years of building, gone in 6 months. What about your personal relationships? I missed my father's final months. Clint would have mysterious crises whenever I planned to visit Dad. I missed his funeral because Clint had a seizure that morning. My sister Naomi was the only family I maintained contact with, and even that was strained because Clint would monitor our calls, sometimes pretending to fall from his wheelchair if I talked too long. Elizabeth introduced evidence, the journal, financial records, medical reports. Miss Garner, this journal documents the defendant's plan to have you institutionalized. Were you aware of this? Not until after his arrest. But looking back, the groundwork was being laid. Things would go missing, and Grace would suggest I was becoming forgetful. I'd find myself in rooms with no memory of going there. I now know Clint was drugging my tea. They had me doubting my own sanity. How did you discover the deception? Angelina looked directly at Clint for the first time. I came home early from visiting Naomi. I heard laughter from our bedroom, intimate laughter. I found my paralyzed husband standing, holding Julia Foster, our maid. Not just standing, moving with the strength and grace of someone who'd never known a wheelchair. What did you do? I wanted to scream, to rage, to destroy everything in that room. Instead, I left quietly and called my sister. She connected me with Mr. Whitmore, and we began building our case. Why didn't you confront him immediately? Because I knew him by then. 4 years of manipulation had taught me how his mind worked. He'd have spun it, made me the villain, possibly had me arrested or committed. I needed proof, and I needed protection. The defense attorney, Harrison Vale, stood for cross-examination. He was good. Clint could afford the best, but Angelina was ready. Miss Garner, you're a successful businesswoman, correct? I was. I'm rebuilding now. Intelligent, educated, sophisticated, yet you expect us to believe you were fooled for 4 years? Yes, she said simply, because love makes us vulnerable, because when someone you trust tells you they're paralyzed, you don't demand nerve conduction tests, because gaslighting is designed to make intelligent people doubt themselves. You never once suspected? I suspected something was wrong, but I suspected myself, not him. That's what psychological abuse does. It turns your own mind against you. You're asking this court to award you millions in damages. Isn't it possible you're exaggerating for financial gain? Angelina laughed, surprising everyone, including herself. Mr. Vale, I spent 4 years washing a healthy man's genitals while he pretended to be paralyzed. I spent 4 years sleeping on a cot, missing my father's death, losing my business, being psychologically tortured by a man who got sexual pleasure from my degradation. There is no amount of money that could make that worth exaggerating. Yet you stayed. For 4 years you stayed. Yes, because I loved him. Because I took my marriage vows seriously. Because I believed that caring for him was my duty as his wife. And because he'd isolated me so completely that I had nowhere else to go. Vale tried several more angles, but Angelina remained unshakable. The truth, she'd learned, was the strongest position. When Elizabeth stood for redirect, she had only one question. Miss Garner, what would you say to other victims of elaborate deception? Angelina turned to the gallery, knowing cameras were recording, knowing her words would reach beyond this courtroom. You're not stupid for trusting. You're not weak for loving. You're not crazy for doubting yourself when someone you love tells you reality isn't what you think. Gaslighting is abuse, whether it involves fake paralysis or just systematic lies, and you deserve to be believed, supported, and free. As she stepped down from the stand, the courtroom was silent. She walked past Clint's table, and he grabbed her wrist, a violation of court protocol that had marshals moving immediately. "You destroyed me," he hissed. "No," she said calmly, loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You destroyed yourself. I just survived long enough to watch it happen." The marshals pulled him away, but not before she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Fear. Real, genuine fear. He was going to prison for a very long time, and everyone in that prison would know he'd faked paralysis while a woman who loved him served his every need. Outside the courthouse, Theodore waited with Naomi, Skylar, and surprisingly, Sarah and Marcus, Clint's other victims who'd flown in for the trial. Sarah, a petite blonde in her 40s, hugged Angelina tightly. "Thank you. For 4 years I've been in therapy trying to convince myself I wasn't crazy. Hearing you testify, seeing him exposed, it's like I can finally breathe." Marcus, a black man in his 50s who'd lost his career to Clint's frame job, shook her hand with tears in his eyes. "He convinced my own family I was a thief. They still don't fully believe me. But after today, after your testimony, maybe they'll understand." "We all understand," Theodore said, his arm coming around Angelina naturally, publicly, stake claimed, and comfort offered simultaneously. The media clamored for statements, but Angelina was done talking for today. She'd spoken her truth, all of it, holding nothing back. The jury would deliberate, though conviction was almost certain given the evidence. That evening, in Theodore's home that had become their sanctuary, Angelina finally allowed herself to cry, not tears of pain or fear, but release. 4 years of poison leaving her system through salt water and shaking shoulders. Theodore held her through it, saying nothing, asking nothing, just being present. When the tears finally stopped, she felt empty in the best way, like a house cleaned of ghosts. "The prosecutor says he'll likely get 40 years minimum," Theodore said eventually. "Life, if the judge is harsh." "It doesn't matter," Angelina realized with surprise. "I mean, I want justice, but the number doesn't matter. He's done. He'll never hurt another woman. That's what matters." "You matter," Theodore corrected. "Your healing, your future, your happiness." "My future," she repeated, tasting the words. "I haven't thought about the future as mine in so long. It was always about managing Clint's needs, surviving each day." "What do you want your future to look like?" Angelina considered. "My fashion line relaunching bigger than before. Travel to Milan finally, maybe Paris, a home that's never been touched by lies, children someday, raised to recognize manipulation and resist it. And," she looked at him, "a partner who sees me as an equal, not a possession or a servant." "I can offer that," Theodore said quietly. "The partnership, the equality, the respect, and the love, if you're ready for it." "I'm getting there," she said honestly. "The trial needs to end first. I need to legally and emotionally close this chapter. But yes, Theodore, when I'm ready, it's you I want to be ready for." He kissed her forehead, a gesture both intimate and patient. "I'll wait, however long it takes." As they sat together in comfortable silence, Angelina's phone buzzed with messages. Support from old clients wanting to work with her again. Interview requests from major fashion magazines. An invitation to speak at a conference on surviving psychological abuse. Her new life was calling, built on the ashes of what Clint had burned, and for the first time in 4 years, she was ready to answer. The verdict would come tomorrow. Clint would likely spend the rest of his life in prison. Grace was already serving 5 years. Julia was in therapy, raising her daughter with the weight of her choices. But tonight, Angelina Garner was free, testified, and unburdened. The truth had been spoken into legal record. Her reality had been validated by a court of law, and that, more than any revenge, was justice. Chapter 9. The verdict's shadow. The jury deliberated for exactly 3 hours and 17 minutes. Angelina knew because she counted every second, sitting in the courthouse cafe with Theodore, Naomi, and her new support system of survivors. When the bailiff announced the jury had reached a verdict, the walk back to the courtroom felt like approaching destiny. Clint sat at the defense table, his orange jumpsuit a far cry from the Italian suits he'd worn while pretending paralysis. His mother, Grace, was absent, serving her own sentence, but Julia sat in the gallery, holding baby Victoria, her presence a complicated reminder of consequences. "Will the defendant please rise?" Judge William Morrison commanded. Clint stood, his posture still arrogant despite everything. "On the count of insurance fraud in the first degree, how do you find?" "Guilty." "On the count of wire fraud?" "Guilty." "On the count of securities fraud?" "Guilty." The litany continued through 27 charges. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Each verdict fell like a stone, building a wall between Clint's past freedom and his future imprisonment. On the count of conspiracy to commit false imprisonment. Guilty. On the count of intentional infliction of emotional distress. Guilty. When the final verdict was read, the courtroom held its breath for sentencing. Judge Morrison looked at Clint with undisguised contempt. "Mr. Eastwood, in my 30 years on the bench, I have rarely encountered such calculated cruelty. You didn't just defraud insurance companies and investors. You systematically destroyed a woman who loved you for sport and profit. You've shown no remorse, no acknowledgement of the pain you've caused." Clint's jaw clenched, but he remained silent. "I sentence you to 45 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Additionally, all assets obtained through fraud are to be liquidated and distributed to your victims, with Miss Garner as primary beneficiary, given the extent of her losses." The gavel fell with finality. Clint turned to stare at Angelina, his eyes promising retribution, even from behind bars. But she didn't flinch. His power over her had died the moment she'd seen him walking with Julia. This was just the funeral. As marshals led Clint away, he suddenly spoke. "You'll never be free of me, Angelina. Every relationship you have, you'll wonder if they're lying. Every kindness will feel like manipulation. I'm in your head forever." Theodore started to respond, but Angelina touched his arm, stepping forward herself. "You're wrong, Clint. You're not in my head. You're in a federal prison, and while you're counting concrete blocks for the next 4 decades, I'll be living, building, loving, succeeding. You're not my trauma. You're just a chapter I've closed." The marshals dragged him away as he screamed obscenities, his final performance falling on deaf ears. Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy was overwhelming, but this time, Angelina was ready. "Miss Garner, how do you feel about the verdict? Justice was served, but this isn't about revenge, it's about prevention. If my story prevents one person from being gaslit, manipulated, or abused, then the pain was worth something." "What's next for you?" "Living. My fashion line relaunches next month with major retailers. I'm also starting a foundation for victims of elaborate fraud and psychological abuse. It's time to transform pain into purpose." "And your relationship with Mr. Whitmore." She looked at Theodore, who stood protective but not possessive beside her. "Mr. Whitmore was my attorney. He's now something more." He tensed slightly. She'd learned he always expected bad news, a vestige of his own childhood trauma. "I'm ready," she said simply. "For us. For real. No more waiting, no more healing first, no more keeping you at arm's length. I want to build something with you. A life, a future, maybe even those children I mentioned once." His response was to pull her into his arms, holding her like she was precious but not fragile, valuable but not possession. "Are you sure?" I've spent 6 months in therapy learning to trust my own judgment again. Yes, I'm sure. The question is, are you? I come with baggage. We all have baggage. The difference is you've unpacked yours, examined it, and decided what to keep and what to throw away. That's not damage. That's wisdom. I love you, she said, the words coming easier now with practice. I love you too. Have since the moment you refused to cry in my office, determined to fight rather than break. They stood together as the party continued below, the noise and celebration a backdrop to their quiet moment. Tomorrow there would be orders to fill, interviews to give, a business to run. But tonight, Angelina Garner was exactly where she wanted to be, in the arms of a man who saw her strength and her scars and treasured both. There's one more thing, Theodore said, pulling back slightly. I've been carrying this for 2 months, waiting for the right moment. He pulled out a small velvet box, and Angelina's breath caught. I'm not proposing, he said quickly. Not yet. You deserve a proper proposal when you're ready, with romance and planning and everything you missed the first time. This is a promise ring, a promise that when you're ready, I'll be here, that I'll never lie to you, never manipulate you, never be anything but honest about who I am and what I feel. The ring was simple, elegant, a single sapphire surrounded by small diamonds, nothing like the ostentatious diamond Clint had given her to mark his ownership. It's perfect, she whispered, letting him slide it onto her right hand. When you're ready to move it to your left hand, just say the word. Theodore Whitmore, are you actually capable of being romantic? You have no idea, he said with a grin that transformed his usually serious face. I've been planning our first proper date for 6 months. I have spreadsheets. She laughed, really laughed, the sound carrying across the night air like freedom itself. Chapter 10. Love's Ultimate Revenge. 1 year later, Angelina stood in the Milanese showroom she'd dreamed of for a decade, watching buyers from around the world examine her latest collection. Resurrection had been a statement, Phoenix had been a comeback, but Unconquered was a victory lap. Theodore sat in the corner, working on his laptop, having flown in to support her, but understanding she needed to do this alone. He'd become remarkably good at being present without overshadowing, supportive without suffocating. Miss Garner, called Adriana Versace, the legendary buyer who'd rejected her meeting 6 years ago when Clint's fake accident had derailed everything. This collection is extraordinary. The way you've woven strength and vulnerability into each piece, it's autobiographical, isn't it? All fashion is autobiography, Angelina replied. We just don't always admit it. I want exclusive European rights. Whatever Nordstrom is paying, I'll double it. The girl who'd slept on a cot beside a fake invalid's bed would have cried. The woman who'd survived and thrived simply smiled. I'll have my team send you the contracts. That evening, in their hotel suite overlooking the Duomo, Theodore opened champagne while Angelina finally allowed herself to feel the magnitude of her triumph. You did it, he said. Milan, exactly as you planned. 6 years late, but yes. Not late, right on time. You weren't ready 6 years ago, not for this level of success. What you've built now, from the ashes of what you lost, is so much stronger. Her phone buzzed with a news alert. Disgraced tech mogul Clint Eastwood beaten in prison, transferred to solitary for protection. She showed Theodore, waiting to feel something, satisfaction maybe, or vindication. Instead, she felt nothing. Clint had become irrelevant to her story. Julia sent another letter, Theodore mentioned, pulling an envelope from his briefcase. I haven't opened it. Your choice whether to read it. Angelina took the letter, considering. Over the past year, Julia had written monthly, chronicling her therapy, her growth, Victoria's development. Angelina had read them all, but never responded. This one was different. The envelope contained photos. Victoria, now 18 months old, chubby-cheeked and bright-eyed, nothing of Clint visible in her features. And a graduation certificate. Julia had completed her degree in social work, planning to help other women who'd been manipulated into harmful situations. The letter was brief. Angelina, I graduate next week. No one will be there to celebrate with me. My family disowned me after the trial. I don't blame them. I don't blame you for not responding to my letters. I just wanted you to know that Victoria and I are building something good from something terrible. You showed me that was possible. I'm including my graduation invitation, not because I expect you to come, but because you deserve to know that your mercy toward me wasn't wasted. I'm becoming someone Victoria won't be ashamed of. Forever grateful, Julia. Are you going to go? Theodore asked, reading over her shoulder. No, Angelina said softly. But I'll send flowers and a trust fund information for Victoria, something Clint can never touch that will ensure she gets an education without desperation driving her choices. That's generous. That's strategic. Victoria is innocent in all this. And maybe with resources and opportunity, she'll become something wonderful despite her origins. Theodore pulled her close, and she melted into his warmth. Tomorrow, they'd fly home to the house they'd bought together. Not his, not hers, but theirs. A place with no ghosts, no medical equipment, no wheelchair ramps, just rooms full of light and possibility. I have something to tell you, Theodore said against her hair. Good or bad? Wonderful, at least I think so. Sarah called. She and Marcus are getting married. 2 survivors of Clint's manipulation, finding love in the support group. She wants you to be maid of honor. Angelina smiled. Another resurrection, another phoenix rising. Of course I will. And, Theodore continued, his voice shifting to something more serious, I have a question to ask you. He moved to one knee, and Angelina's breath caught. A year of healing, of rebuilding, of learning to trust again, and now this moment she'd never thought she'd want again. Angelina Garner, he began, pulling out a ring box different from the promise ring she'd been wearing. You've taught me that strength isn't about never falling, it's about how you rise. You've shown me that love isn't possession or control, it's partnership and respect. You've proven that the human spirit can survive calculated cruelty and still choose kindness. Theodore, let me finish. I'm a lawyer. I've been practicing this closing argument for weeks. His smile was nervous, endearing. I love you not because you need me, you don't. Not because you're broken, you're not. I love you because you're brilliant, resilient, creative, and kind. Because you make me want to be better. Because every day with you is an adventure in discovering what partnership really means. He opened the box, revealing a ring that was quintessentially her. Unique, artistic, clearly custom designed with her aesthetic in mind. Will you marry me? Not because you need a protector or provider, but because you want a partner. Will you build a life with me based on truth, respect, and love that's chosen daily rather than assumed? Yes, Angelina said, not even needing to think. Yes to all of it. Yes to you. As he slipped the ring on her finger, her left hand this time, Angelina thought about the woman who discovered her husband walking 4 years ago. That woman had been shattered, thinking love was lost to her forever. But that woman hadn't known about Theodore's steady presence, hadn't known about the strength she'd find in survival, hadn't known that the best revenge against someone who tried to break you is to become unbreakable. 3 months later, their wedding was small, intimate, real, everything her first wedding hadn't been. Sarah was her maid of honor. Marcus was Theodore's best man. Naomi officiated, having gotten ordained online specifically for this moment. Even Skylar cried, though she'd deny it later. Julia didn't attend, but she sent a gift, a photo album documenting Angelina's fashion comeback, every article, every review, every triumph carefully preserved. The note simply said, "Proof that phoenixes are real." As Theodore and Angelina exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promises of truth, partnership, and choosing each other daily, a news alert popped up on someone's phone. Clint Eastwood dead in prison, apparent suicide. Naomi started to silence the phone, but Angelina stopped her. "Read it," she said calmly. The article was brief. Clint had been found in his cell, having somehow obtained pills despite being on suicide watch since his transfer to solitary. He'd left a note, ranting about being destroyed by an ungrateful wife, claiming he was the real victim. The wedding guests looked at Angelina nervously, waiting for her reaction. "He chose his ending," she said simply. "I choose mine, and my ending is this: marrying a good man, surrounded by people who love me, building a life of truth and joy." She turned to Theodore. "Continue with the vows. Clint has taken enough time from my life." Theodore smiled, that private smile that was just for her, and continued, "I promise to love you on your strongest days and your most vulnerable ones, to celebrate your successes and hold you through your struggles, to never lie, never manipulate, never be anything but exactly who I am, a man completely in love with exactly who you are." "I promise," Angelina responded, "to trust you even when trust feels dangerous, to build with you rather than in spite of you, to choose love over fear, truth over comfort, and us over everything else, to never lose myself in you, but to find myself with you." They kissed as husband and wife, and the small gathering erupted in joy. Real joy, not the performed happiness of her first wedding, but genuine celebration of love found after loss, trust built after betrayal, life chosen after near destruction. The reception was in Theodore's, now their, backyard under string lights and stars. No elaborate production, no five-tier cake, no society photographers. Just people who'd proven themselves through fire, celebrating two survivors who'd found each other. As the evening wound down, Angelina found herself alone with Theodore on the porch where they'd shared so many difficult conversations. "Any regrets?" he asked. "None. You?" "Just one. I wish I'd found you sooner, could have prevented—" "No," she interrupted. "If you'd found me sooner, I wouldn't have been ready. I would have been the girl who thought love meant sacrifice, who confused devotion with servitude. I had to go through hell to understand what heaven looked like." "And what does heaven look like?" "Like this, like truth, like partnership, like love that strengthens rather than diminishes." She paused, then smiled. "Like really good sex with someone who actually wants me." Theodore laughed, pulling her closer. "Just really good." "Mind-blowing," she amended. "Turns out when your partner isn't faking paralysis, intimacy is actually intimate." They stood together, watching guests dance in their backyard, Sarah and Marcus lost in each other, Naomi teaching Skylar some complicated step, even baby Victoria, brought by a friend of Julia's, toddling around in a flower girl dress they'd sent despite Julia's absence. "This is my revenge," Angelina said softly. "Not his death, not his imprisonment. This, being happy, being loved, being free. He tried to convince me I was worthless, and instead I discovered I'm invaluable. He tried to break me, and instead I became unbreakable. He tried to make me disappear, and instead I became unmissable." "And unforgettable," Theodore added, kissing her temple. 6 months later, when Angelina discovered she was pregnant, she thought of Clint's journal entry about her never having children, about dying alone and broken. She placed a hand on her still flat stomach and smiled. 2 years later, when their daughter was born, healthy, perfect, surrounded by love from the moment she drew breath, Angelina named her Victoria Hope. Victoria for the woman who hadn't survived Clint's abuse, but whose story had helped convict him. Hope for what Angelina had never lost, even in the darkest moments. 5 years later, when Angelina's fashion empire had boutiques in 12 countries and employed over 500 people, she kept a photo on her desk. From that night she'd discovered Clint walking, not as a reminder of pain, but of the moment her real life began. 10 years later, when Theodore was nominated for a judgeship based on his work defending abuse survivors, Angelina stood beside him at the ceremony, their 2 children, Victoria Hope and James Truth, playing at their feet. "You know what the best revenge really is?" she asked Theodore that night as they watched their children sleep. "What?" "Forgetting to think about revenge at all. Days go by now when I don't think of him, weeks sometimes. He's become nothing more than a cautionary tale I tell when it might help someone. He wanted to be the main character in my story, and instead he became a footnote." "Not even a footnote," Theodore corrected. "A typo that got edited out in the final draft." They stood together in the doorway of their children's room, watching small chests rise and fall with peaceful sleep. Children who would grow up knowing love was partnership, that strength wasn't dominance, that trust was earned through consistent truth. Somewhere, Clint's mother Grace was finishing her extended sentence, additional years added for conspiracy charges uncovered during the investigation. Somewhere, Julia was graduating with her master's in social work, Victoria beside her, building a life of service from a foundation of shame. Somewhere, Sarah and Marcus were celebrating their 5th wedding anniversary, proof that broken people could heal each other rather than hurt each other. But in this house, in this moment, Angelina thought of none of them. She thought only of the morning's fashion show, tomorrow's family picnic, the weekend's trip to see Naomi's new baby. She thought of life, rich, full, honest life, built on the ashes of what had tried to destroy her. "I love you," Theodore said, words they'd now exchanged thousands of times, each iteration honest, each repetition a choice. "I love you too," she replied, meaning it in ways the woman sleeping on a cot beside a fake invalid could never have imagined. They went to their bedroom, their real bedroom, with a bed big enough for 2, with no medical equipment, no performance, no lies, just 2 people who'd found each other after walking through hell, who'd chosen to build heaven together. And as Angelina fell asleep in Theodore's arms, she didn't think of revenge at all. She thought of tomorrow's possibilities, next week's challenges, next year's dreams. She thought of the future, bright, honest, and entirely hers. Because the ultimate revenge against someone who tried to steal your life isn't taking theirs. It's living yours so fully, so joyfully, so successfully that their attempt becomes irrelevant. It's thriving so completely that their name becomes just another word you forgot how to spell. In the end, Clint had been right about one thing. Angelina Garner was unforgettable. But he'd been wrong about why. She wasn't unforgettable because of what he'd done to her. She was unforgettable because of what she'd done despite him. And that was the sweetest revenge of all.